Welcome everybody. Actually, Super Mondays here in the Holy Apple, Holy Hilltop, in the Holy Land, the 22nd day, 22nd day of Cheshvan, 5781, as we wind down the month of the 8th month of the year, the month of Cheshvan. Okay, today our class is titled Business as Usual with Our Arab Enemies, and then a few dozen question marks. Business as usual with our Arab enemies, a few question marks. Okay, before we start, a few things. I saw some statistic today on the Drudge report that 189 million hours of sleep was lost while people were waiting for the election results. I'm proud to say that I'm not part of that 189 million hours lost. I did not lose hours. I did not lose minutes of sleep. I slept fine. I slept fine. I wasn't worried. It wasn't on my mind whatsoever. Irrelevant who won. So I'm not part of that club. Okay, next thing is, in the last couple of weeks, I must give credit to various, usually it's rabbis that help me create these classes, because I've had 3 classes that were created, were brought into fruition through classes that I was listening to myself when the rabbi said something that really ticked me off, and I was going to dedicate 1, 2, 3, depending on what the subject was. I was going to dedicate some classes in order to rebuttal certain statements that were made. So those were 3 classes. Number 1, a rabbi I know who I have a lot of respect for, he had mentioned something, he had said a derogatory comment about the city of Jericho, and that encouraged me to put together 3 classes on the holiness and specialness of the city of Jericho. God willing, we'll get to it soon. That was one class. Second class, I was in Jerusalem listening to a different rabbi, and the rabbi asked, why in the world did Abraham, when he first came into the land of Israel, why in the world did he, the first place that he chose to go to was Elon Moreh Shechem, Nablus. Like, if it was me, the rabbi said, I would have gone to Safed, or to Meron, or to Tiberias. What was in his mind, the rabbi said. Oh, I said, Rabbi, you got it. I'm going to do a couple of classes about the holiness and specialness of the city of Shechem. Elon Moreh Shechem, what the Gentiles call Nablus. That was the second class. And now, drum roll please. Okay, in today's class, one of my married daughters, sent me a article from somewhere, and she said, Abba, you probably like to read this, or maybe you won't like to read it, but it's important for you to see. And when I read it, it really got me nauseous, and I put together this 2-part, God willing, a 2-part class on the subject of business as usual with our Arab enemies. Okay, so if anybody else out there would like to tick me off, you might get upset me, say something politically correct, or that really gets me off, you might have a class dedicated in your name too. You might be responsible for spreading more Torah in the world. Through their upsetting me, more Torah is spread in the world. Okay, with that said and done, let's go forward. Recently, in Judea and Samaria. There was a virtual gathering because, of course, of the virus, to encourage joint business cooperation between Arabs and Jews in Judea and Samaria, Yehuda and Shomron. This has been going on some time. Now this organization, it's not an organization, I would say organizations. They have support from outside of Israel. There are business people who are looking for joint projects between Arabs and Jews in Judea and Samaria. And there are also within the government and within Israel, not necessarily with the government, also organizations that are encouraging this union. Now, it's important to realize that the Arab Authority, the official law of the Arab Authority in Judea and Samaria forbids Arabs to work by Jews. Now, if you're caught working for Jews, then you can receive a penalty, or you could be even imprisoned for who knows how long. Very interesting. Sometimes, I'm embarrassed to say, but sometimes we could only learn from our Arab neighbors how to deal with this issue. Okay, so in this interview that my daughter sent me, there's a recent immigrant that came with his family to settlement in Judea or Samaria, and I happen to know this family. Of course, I'm keeping the names and the locations to myself because he's not the issue. The issue itself is this union, this unkosher union. That's the important issue. Anyways, this Jew, who in my eyes is a Jewish hero, he happens to be in the family very, very special people, good people, so it's not like, it's not like he's a bad person, but even good people, even myself, we all make mistakes. And unfortunately, this is a big mistake, this joint effort, this joint business cooperation. So anyways, this good Jew who came with his family left the United States of America. He's a hero in my book, in God's book. And he came. Anyway, somehow he got caught up with this incentive. And he began to work in partnership with Arabs. He says in this interview, this Jewish immigrant from the States, he says that when he comes to his work, when one of these Arab villages or cities, so the Arabs tells him that this land belongs to the Arabs. That's his business partner. He tells him, you know what? This land belongs to the Arab people, not to the Jews, to the Arabs. And then the Jew responds, no, this land belongs to the Jewish people. And then business as usual. That's in the interview, business as usual. Business as usual with people that deny, people, scoffers, kofrim, that deny that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. As we know, one of the 7 commandments of Noah is you're not allowed to steal. Anybody, I remember many, many years ago, before I came to Israel, so it's like 40 years ago, I remember reading something that the Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote, that for the, not for our sake, but for the sake of the Arab population, it's a good idea for them to get off this bandwagon of this land is our land. Very it's very important for them to get off of this bandwagon. Why? Because it's a boomerang in their face. Once they claim that this is their land, that means that they are interested in taking it away from the rightful owners, the Jewish people. This is an act of stealing, and that is one of the 7 commandments of Noah that you're not allowed to do. And not only are you allowed to do it, but a person that would, a non-Jew that would transgress one of these 7 commandments, we know those people are, if there was a religious court, or even a religious non-Jewish court, they would be put to death. So it's a pretty serious thing, and it's good advice by the Lubavitcher Rebbe to get off of that train. Okay. As I mentioned, there are groups in the States and in Europe that are financing this joint project and trying to forward their agenda. In fact, a business corporation, person from the States offered $500,000 for a joint Arab-Jewish business project in Judea and Samaria. A joint Arab and Jewish residents of Judea and Samaria, $500,000, and it was lotteried off. Who won it? Believe it or not, our friend, the new immigrant from the United States, and his Arab business partner won the lottery and won $500,000 to invest in various business ideas and cooperation, Arabs and Jews. How should a Torah Jew, a Jew connected to the commandments, to Torah, to the land of Israel, to the people of Israel, how do we look at this situation with our Torah glasses? So, let's roll. Very important stuff. We will see in this how low the Jewish state has fallen in the last 100 years. We will see. We're going to take it step by step, and we will see when it comes to encouraging Jewish labor, Jewish business in the land of Israel, we will see how far we've fallen over the years. But first, Torah teaches us when it comes to buying. Person wants to buy merchandise. Person wants to buy food. Whatever it might be. A person is interested in selling merchandise. We see in the Torah, in Vayikra, Leviticus 25:14, that a Jew must give preferential treatment to fellow Jews when it comes to buying and when it comes to selling. That is brought down by our sages on this verse. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to giving a loan, L-O-A-N, not the other alone, it tells us in Exodus 22:24 and in the tractate of Bava Metzia 71, side A, tells us straight out that though a person, a Jew, may take interest from a non-Jew, and then you're making some money, you must prefer to give a loan, a free loan, to your fellow Jew. You have to show preferential treatment to a fellow Jew. So far, we have three categories where one must show preference to a Jew over a non-Jew. When it comes to buying, go to a store. When it comes to you want to sell your car, you want to sell your house, and you have two offers, you shall prefer to do the business transaction with a fellow Jew over a non-Jew in these three categories: buying, selling, and loans. Now, somebody out there might say, oh man, this sounds like racist. It ain't no racist. Why? Because, you know, when I was a kid, there was this great song. It was called We Are Family. Remember that one? We are family, talking to my brothers and my sisters and me. Yeah, it was a great song. Yeah, we are family. So, it's very simple. Whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish and you have family members, it is natural for a family member to look out to see if there's somebody in his family, his or her family, that needs assistance, or that I can give them a reduction in rate. So there's nothing racist here. You have a fellow Jew, it's a family. And just like any family, whether you're black, white, or red, a person has a responsibility first to take care of family members. Once you've taken care of your family members, you could expand yourself and you could take care of other people. You could take care of friends, you could take care of people of different walks of life. But first things first, a person has a responsibility. You know, even when a non-Jew gets married, they say, till death you part. You know, and they don't say that with a friend. Death, you know, your friends, death till you part. But they do say that with a family, with your wife or your husband. So that's the idea. So don't get hot under the collar. Don't get too excited. Oh, this sounds racist, because it's not. Okay. There are tremendous problems providing Arabs jobs and partnership. Number one, we saw three categories: buying, selling, and loan. But we're not finished. As far as housing is concerned, we are told in Deuteronomy 7:2, it says, Lo techonem, do not allow the nations to settle the land. Do not sell them homes or sell them land. Okay, now, it is true that if you look in the context of these passages in the Torah, it seems like it's talking in regard to the evil 7 nations that were around at the time of the Torah, at the time of the desert and coming into the land of Israel with Joshua as our leader. That is true. In the context, it looks like it's talking about the 7 nations. However, that just looks like the text. Because as we know, there are 2 parts of the Torah. There is the written law and there is the oral law. And we need both of them. If a person just has the written law, you can't go anywhere with the written law, because there's nothing you could, even the most simple commandments that you think you understand, you don't understand. Just an example. A person knows that he's been brought up to understand that a Jew fasts on Yom Kippur. That is true. But if you look at the text, it doesn't say anywhere that a Jew has to fast on Yom Kippur. It says a Jew must afflict himself. Well, baby, to me, afflicting yourself could be you could put your finger in a car door and have your ex-friend close the door on your finger on Yom Kippur a few times maybe, and that would be pretty afflicting. Or you can invite a friend that you really hate and can't stand him, and just to be with him for a couple of minutes is really a big affliction on your part. Invite him over on Yom Kippur, spend about 5 or 10 minutes, and you've done your job. So even the most simple commandments that we think of the written law, you can't go anywhere. You're in neutral. You're in neutral. Take care. Okay, so where do we know that this is talking about all nations? So I'm just going to give a few sources. So get out your pens or put me on rewind, and here we go. These are very, very important, because before I go over the sources, let me just say this. It's very important to remember that there are stages here. One stage is that there are certain commandments that were regarding the 7 nations, the 7 Canaanite nations that lived here in the time of Joshua. On the next level, there are certain commandments that are connected to Gentiles that worship foreign gods, foreign worshiping of Gentiles. And then the last but not least, there are many laws pertaining to Gentiles who do not worship idols or foreign worshiping, but still they are not Jewish. And therefore there are many laws that pertain to them. So those are the 3 levels. The 7 nations, 1. The idol worshiping or the foreign worshiping Gentiles, and the Gentiles that do not do foreign worshiping, but they are non-Jews. Okay, so now we're bringing you the sources that this prohibition of selling land or selling houses to the nations of the world includes all types of nations. For example, the Muslims, according to many opinion in Jewish law, the Muslims are not foreign worshippers, idol worshippers. However, they are non-Jews. So it's very important to understand that this prohibition of selling a house or selling land in the land of Israel to a non-Jew is a prohibition to all non-Jews, no matter what level they happen to be on. So let's give over the sources. Number 1, look up in the book Kaftor Vaferach in the 10th chapter. Number 2, in the question and answer book Meshiv Davar, the 2nd volume, and the question is the 56th question. Look up the book that brings down the 613 commandments called Minchat Chinuch. Look up the mitzvah of 284 and paragraph 23. 4th source is the Kuntrus, which is a little book, the Kuntrus of the resting of the land for the 7th year. The land of Israel must rest. Written by the Ridbaz on page 12. Look up on our 5th source is the Chazon Ish, the laws of the 7th year, the sabbatical year. The chapter 24, and the paragraph is 3. Beit Yosef, that's right, that's the Code of Jewish Law author, Rabbi Yosef Cairo. Look him up in the Beit Yosef on Choshen Mishpat, 249, paragraph 2. Also, you could see if you have a uncensored version of the Bach, the Bayit Chadash, who is a commentator on the Beit Yosef right there, 249, that's in Choshen Mishpat. You will see, very interesting, with the censorship, it looks like he claims that there's no problem of selling homes to Muslims. But if you look in the uncensored version, then you'll see that he includes, of course, Muslims in this prohibition. But we're not through with you yet. We are still going strong. Source number 7, Or Sameach. The Or Sameach, it has a commentary on Maimonides, and Rabbi Meir Simcha Dvins was his name. The laws of forbidden relations, Isurei Bi'ah, chapter 14, law 7. Look up also the tremendous sage of the previous generation, Rabbi Kappa, who was a maven, who was an unbelievable, the expert on Maimonides in a generation before. Also in the laws of forbidden relations, page 219, paragraph number 15. So please do yourself a favor and check all of these out. We're talking about all types of non-Jews, even those that do not worship idols or foreign worshiping, whatever we would like to call it. Of course, the Maimonides brings down these laws in the laws of foreign worshiping, chapter 10, law 3. You could also find it in Tractate Avodah Zarah, page 20, side A, or you could look up the Code of Jewish Law, 151A. That's Yoredea, the Code of Jewish Law of Yoredea. Check those out. The Maimonides ask a good question. Why is that we're not allowed to sell homes to non-Jews in the land of Israel? And his answer is very simple, right to the point, important to remember. For if they do not possess land, their dwelling will be temporary. Got it? Very simple, straightforward. If they don't own property, if they don't own homes, if they don't own their own home, it's going to be very difficult for them to live here. And that's the idea. This land belongs to the Jewish people. You know, this land is our land, this land is our land, it's only our land, it's only our, yeah. So, this is our land. And therefore, it is really difficult for non-Jews to live in the land of Israel, because we only have one land in this gigantic world of ours. Unlike the Muslims who have 25 or 26 countries, we only have one. And therefore, it is difficult for a non-Jew to find himself or herself in the land of Israel, to settle down here, because God gave this country to us in order that we would be separate, in order to become a light unto the nations. In order to influence positively the nations, we first have to be separated from them. And through separation, then we could be a light to the nations. That's the idea. So yes, it is difficult, and it's on purpose. It was done purposely to keep it Jewish. Moving right along, other prohibitions of nations living here amongst us. We have in Exodus 23:33, it says that the nations should not live here in the land of Israel because they will cause you to sin. Now, there are various commentators that talk about foreign worshiping, idol worshiping here. However, there are many commentaries that say no, it has nothing to do with idol worshiping. It has to do with sinning. Sinning, there's there's hundreds of transgressions, thousands of transgressions a person can do. So therefore, tell you an amazing lesson, amazing class I heard perhaps 30 years ago. I was listening in the tomb of Joseph in the city of Shechem. I was listening to a great rabbi named Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg, and he said an amazing thing which I've always remembered. He said the following: if you see a lot of Jewish people falling into crime and other transgressions, understand that a lot of it has to do with the Arab population surrounding us. Because even though we might not be their next door neighbors, they do live next to us. They do live in the village next door, a few kilometers, a few miles away. And, their cities might be a couple of miles away from us. It doesn't matter so much. We are surrounded, in the land of Israel, we are surrounded by Arabs. And therefore, the fact that they live here and breathe the air and go about their business, there's something kind of like a virus that the Jewish people living amongst them, we catch this. You know, when in the times of Noah, when there was a flood, it wasn't just that the bad guys were wiped out. The bad guys were wiped out. But also, very interesting, that the animal kingdom was wiped out. Why? Why was the plant kingdom wiped out? You know why? Our commentators tell us an amazing thing, amazing lesson. That the people were so evil, root evil, these people. The root of evil in the time of Noah and his generation, that they had their impurity was on such a high level. I don't know what it was on the Richter scale, maybe a 7 or 8, but the fact that people were so terrible influenced the animal and plant kingdoms. Amazing lesson. Many times that's a lesson of life. Don't think that, oh, I don't live in that neighborhood. Don't think that you're protected. You know, don't think that you're protected. When in our world, there is such a lack of modest dress in this world, not only with women, also with men. It's so terrible. It's so in your face and nauseating. You think that is not influencing Jewish people that live in so-called secluded neighborhoods and protected areas. They don't know. They might not have a TV and they might not have a computer. True. This is true. You're affected. It's in the air. It's like a virus. It's in the air. You could catch it because it's all around us. Remember that. So, and after he said that, some years later, I saw this straight out. The words of our sages tell us that the Jewish people in Egypt, why were they on such a low level? They were on the 49th level in purity. What happened to them? When they came to Egypt, they were the sons of Jacob, Rachel, and Leah. They were tremendous, righteous people. You know why? It says that they were influenced by the fact that they were living in Egypt, which was a very, very impure, it still is, impure country. And it influenced people, even though you might not come into contact, eye-to-eye contact with Egyptians or whatever the situation might be. Okay? And to understand this opinion that we're not just talking about idol worshipping, so you could look up in the book called Yir'eim HaShalem, look up in chapter 315, and you'll see it there. Last but not least, we have another prohibition of keeping non-Jews in the land of Israel. Of course, there are conditions where a non-Jew would be allowed to live in the land of Israel of course, you need to observe the 7 commandments of Noah, not just because you agree with it, but because you know that God expects you and you are commanded by God to receive it. You would have to go to some kind of tribunal court and receive it, because God commanded Moses to command you throughout the generations. That's how you have to accept the 7 commandments of Noah, not just because you think it's a good idea or it seems moral to you or ethical. And there's a few other conditions of living here. No national rights. You have social rights, but no national. You can't be in the government. You can't run for office. Okay, so we're not talking about those good Gentiles. We're talking about the others. So, it says in Numbers 33:53, it's written there the following, that you shall expel the inhabitants and settle therein. So very interesting. According to majority opinion, the commandment to settle in the land of Israel has a prerequisite to it. The prerequisite to the settling in the land of Israel is expelling the inhabitants who are not willing to accept the conditions to live peacefully in the land of Israel. So this is something that unfortunately the last 40 years or so the settlement movement has long overlooked. Their idea is, let us settle the land and everything else is not important. The inhabitants, our neighbors, the Arabs, that doesn't really matter to them. What matters is to physically bring another house, a trailer home, and put another family on a mountain. What happens surrounding us? The Arabs are multiplying and they're taking over many areas. Even the areas which are called sea, which are supposed to belong to the state of Israel, and they're really taking over. Maybe one time I'll bring a map here to show it to you. You'll see it face to face. It's really amazing, the takeover that the Arabs are doing. I'm talking once again in lands that are supposed to be controlled, by Israel. So, this opinion that there is a prerequisite to settling the land of Israel, and that is the commandment to expel the nations that are here, we'll mention a few of the opinions. Number one, we have Nachmanides, we have Maimonides, we have Rashi, we have the Sifrei, we have the Gra, we have Tosfot Reed, we have the Seforno, we have the Tractate of Sota, page 34a, we have the Malbim, and the Beat, and the list goes on. Anybody interested in knowing exactly where they are? Okay, most of the time you could find it on the verse that I quoted, Numbers 33:53. There's a few other sources which are not in there in the Talmud. If you put in a question over there on the comments section below in the YouTube, I will give you the exact sources there. Okay, so we see a prerequisite. First, we have to, not necessarily first, but at the same time that we're settling the land of Israel, we have to realize that unless we relate to the Arab or the nation problem, then it could be that one day we will be taken over, as when I came to the land of Israel 40 years ago, many areas that I traveled are no longer able, as a Jew, we are no longer able to travel these cities. So as the years go by, we are losing many parts of the land of Israel because of our Arab enemies. But to strengthen this point, put on a seatbelt over there. And number one, we are told by our sages, you could find this in Shochar Tov, Psalm 80, paragraph 8, or you could find this also in Vayikra Rabbah 36:2. The Jewish people are compared to a vineyard. Why is that? I know that we're sweet. That could be a good idea over there. But our sages tell us that why are we compared to a vineyard? And also the land of Israel is compared to a vineyard. Why is that? Because of this verse that I mentioned in Psalms 80, verse 8. It says, remove the nations and then you shall plant. Which means, as a resident of Elon Moreh, a settlement not too far from the Holy Apple here, we have 6 or 7 vineyards, gigantic vineyards, surrounding our community. Really big. And you could see them when they prepare new areas for planting a vineyard. Number one, they have to send in tractors and plows. They have to get rid of all the rocks and the thorns and whatever is interfering in the soil. We have to get rid of it to make sure that now we have just soil. And that's the idea. The rocks, the thorns, the garbage. Okay, those are our enemies that are in the land of Israel. First step is to remove them. After that, only after that, could we start planting the vineyard. That's how it works. So that's step number 1. So remember that example by our sages, the example of the vineyard. Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Kook, who passed away in 1934. Many people mistakenly think that he was the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel. They're right and wrong. He was the first chief rabbi of Israel, but before there was a state, because 1934 is 14 years before the state of Israel. But he was not the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel. Okay, now, Rav Kook tells us an amazing piece of information. This is brought down, Rabbi Maimon, who was the first minister of religion in the state of Israel at its creation. He, in a conversation that he once had with Rabbi Avram Kook, he asked them the following question, and he recorded the answer, and today one may see this answer in the condensed Code of Jewish Law by Rabbi Gansfried. Now, there are many publications of Rabbi Gansfried's condensed Code of Jewish Law. You must find the printing house, a printing company by Mossad Harav Kook. If you find the condensed Code of Jewish Law written by Rabbi Gansfried, published by Mossad Harav Kook, you will find this conversation that took place between Rabbi Maimon and Rabbi Kook. It is on page 467 in the back of at the end of the book of the Code, Condensed Code of Jewish Law. Check it out. Amazing question Rabbi Maimon asked. He said, I don't understand. We have so many blessings. A Jew is commanded every single day of his life to say 100 blessings. Imagine that, 100 blessings every day. That is 3,000 in a month. That is, in a year, we're talking about, 36,000 blessings. Jews say a lot of blessings. Why couldn't they come up with one little blessing when you come and move to the land of Israel? Why don't we thank God when we step out of our plane and go down those steps of the plane and we hit the Ben Gurion airport, why don't we get up and say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kidishanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu, lashevet be'eretz Yisrael, or to live in Eretz Yisrael. Why don't we say a blessing that we are about to observe the commandment of living in the land of Israel? Rav Kook gives a tremendous answer. This answer is similar to a principle that is brought down by the Rashba, a Jewish law commentator. The Rashba tells us that I didn't write where it is in the Rashba, but the Rashba writes that if a person, in order to fulfill a commandment, you need other people's help or agreement, then we don't say a bracha. We don't say a blessing. If it's up to you to fulfill a commandment, like right now, I get myself something to eat, I buy myself something to eat, I observe a commandment of saying the grace after the meals. Okay? I ate, I bought something, I open up my fridge, whatever. That's how it works. However, if I'm dependent on other people, persons, in order to observe this commandment, then I would not say a blessing. For example, let's say I wanted to give charity. Maybe some of you have been in positions in life where you only had a few pennies and you gave it to somebody, and man, this dude freaks out on you, you know, like, shoo, shoo, boom, boom, boom. He's throwing that nickel back in your face. Hey, you know, like they only take bills. They only take them bills, none of these coin jive. Yeah, I've had that a few times. You know, I wanted to, like, you know, I only had a few coins in my pocket and I had given it, you know, they just like, it's happened to me 1 or 2 times. They throw it back at you. So we don't say a blessing before we are about to observe the commandment of giving charity, though it is a commandment of God. Okay, because we're dependent on the receiving of people, and people do not always want to receive. Sometimes some people are proud, they don't want to receive help, assistance. Could be a lot of reasons why a person is not interested. Maybe they don't like you, and they don't want to owe you something. There could be a lot of reasons why a person does not accept assistance, help, whether it's monetary or something else. Okay, so listen to this. So Rav Kook tells us, why don't we say a blessing when we come to live in the land of Israel? It's one of the 613 commandments according to many sources. And he says also that living in the land of Israel is just the beginning stage of fulfilling the commandment. The final stage, the continuation stage of fulfilling the mitzvah, the commandment to live in Israel, is expelling the nations. And little old me getting off a plane at Ben Gurion Airport in Israel, I mean, I wish I had the power. I wish I had the ability and the finances and the know-how, but it's just me. I am not able to bring to fruition the expulsion of the nations that do not follow the guidelines to live in the land of Israel, our enemies. So therefore, Rabbi Kook is saying an amazing thing. When you come to the land of Israel, when you live here, that's the first step. Very good. You know, you will give you like a clap on your back, or a high five, or today I guess no more high fives or low fives. It's just them elbow fives, whatever they are. So it's only the first step. The second step, the finale step, is expelling the nations from the land of Israel. And that is not always in our control, or usually it's not in our hands. That's something that would be in the hands of a government or a king. So that's why we don't say a commandment. Because in order to fulfill the commandment of living in Israel, there is a prerequisite, and that is expelling the nations. Exactly what we're talking about. So we're not interested in making people comfortable. We're not interested in having business deals and joint cooperation between Arab businesses and Jewish business. We want the Arab enemy out of business. Not in business, and not cooperation, and not giving them more funds so they could build a few more houses here and have more kids and never leave. Thank you very much. Next. Question and answers of the Ribash. The Ribash was a student of the Ran. He was born approximately 800 years ago. He was a student of the Ran. And he writes in his question and answers, the first volume, look it up, 101, question 101. This is pretty ironic, it's called 101. Listen to his question. He brings the opinion of the Tashbetz. The Tashbetz says, the Tashbetz was asked, a person that wants to come and live in the land of Israel, is he allowed to ask a Gentile on the Sabbath to do a prohibition, whether it's a rabbinic prohibition or a Torah prohibition? Is one allowed to ask a Gentile on the Sabbath in order to help a Jew come and live in Israel? Are you allowed to do that? Yes or no? The Tashbetz says yes. In order to get a Jew out of countries, because it says in the Talmud that a Jew that lives outside the land of Israel is likened to one that has no God. He's likened to one that is doing idol worshiping, foreign worshiping. So you don't want to be in that situation. It ain't too cool to be in such a situation. So therefore, the Tashbetz, according to his thinking, a Jew would be allowed to ask a Gentile to perform either a rabbinic or Torah prohibition for his sake of making aliyah, coming to Israel. Now, the Ribash comes. He says, no way, Ray. Not so. I disagree with this Tashbetz. You know why? Because the fact is that when someone comes to Israel, it's very good. But the major precept of living in the land of Israel, more so than the living here, is expelling the nations that are present in this land. That is more of a prerequisite than living here, than a Jew living himself. Of course, we need both. But when push comes to shove, the Ribash says, much more important is getting the land of Israel out of the hands of the non-Jews. And therefore, a Jew is allowed to ask a Gentile on Sabbath to perform a rabbinical or a Torah prohibition in order to, let's say, buy a house from a non-Jew, thus expelling the non-Jew from the land of Israel. A Jew bought a house from a non-Jew. He's removed the house from the non-Jewish possession, and that the Jewish law says that the Ribash says that's what you're allowed to do. But just so you could make aliyah, so you could move to the land of Israel, we do not allow any such, any prohibition to ask a Gentile to help you, furthering your coming to the land of Israel. Only when it comes to expelling, to buying land or buying a house from a non-Jew, thus he is removed from this part of the land of Israel, that we allow to transgress the Sabbath by asking a non-Jew to write a contract for us selling, buying and selling this house or this land in Israel. Last but not least, and then we'll call it a day, and we'll get back for our second part. Last but not least is the Ritba. The Ritba says on the tractate of Rosh Hashanah, page 32, side B, the word begins, look it up, mihu. And here's what he says, I summarize. The reason our sages allowed to transgress a rabbinical commandment for the sake of the land of Israel is due to the fact that this commandment is applicable at all times. For there is a benefit for all of the Jewish people removing the land of Israel from impure foreign hands. Got it? The Ritba comes and just like, pow, hits it out of the stadium there for us. You are allowed to do a rabbinical, we are allowed to transgress a rabbinical commandment of asking a non-Jew to do some form of labor, some form of work for us, only when it comes to the land of Israel, because this is an important law for all times, for all of Jewish history. It doesn't matter whether we run the country or not, because if any Jew throughout the last 2,000-3,000 years we were able to buy a home or buy land off of a non-Jew, thus expelling them and bringing a Jew in their place, then this is exactly what the Torah tells us. For this type of commandment, of removing the land of Israel from foreign impure hands, that we allow a rabbinical prohibition to ask a Gentile to put together a contract for us, or perhaps to go to the bank and pay some money so we don't lose the deal and we make a seal on the deal. Don't forget, don't touch that dial. We'll be back next week for the second part.